All right, guys, welcome to Foundation Programming Day 5. We're going to continue with adding JavaScript to our application. Yesterday, we were working on the color changer. Was anybody able to continue applying more work onto this that they want to show their outcome?
Yeah, I made some pretty good progress on mine.
Yeah, let's see it.
Hold on. I gotta reopen up the HTML with JavaScript.
That's okay.
All right. Background color apps and style. Okay. Share. All right. Can you see it?
I can.
Okay. So blue, green, red, yellow, orange, random.
Okay. I'm interested on how that random is working.
So I created a function that basically every time you click on this, it'll pass an argument in the event listener. I had to look up how to um, what was it called? Apply. It wasn't. It started with a B, I think. It was a. Hold on, I'll look at. Ah, there we go. When you actually called the function or the event listener rather, it was auto firing every time I used anything until I had to look up how to bind something, and then after you bind it, you pass a null argument, so it's not another like event it's listening for, and then I was able to pass an actual argument instead of just a function. So I passed an argument into my function, and if that argument was random, then, or if it wasn't random, then it just applied the color to the background. And if it was random, then I created an object, a simple object with the keys were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there are 5 colors, and the values were those colors. And then did a random number generator, which was a number between 1 and 5 because there are 5. Um, and then whatever that number came up, it would look up the value of that number in the object and pass that to the color change.
Awesome. That's pretty cool.
And it worked.
I'm curious, how is random just shuffling through all of colors? Did you Was that the intention
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
okay?
It's only the options for the random are a value of 1 is blue, 2 is green, 3 is red, 4 is yellow, and 5 is orange. So there's only the way I set up the random function, I used a math.floor and then a random number times the maximum value, which is 5, minus the minimum value, which is 1. Um, and then that would give me an option of 0 to 4, but then adding the minimum value of 1 again, give it to 0, or give it to 1 to 5. So it can only
Okay.
return numbers 1 through 5. I could modify it to return any number I wanted, and I could change it to like hexadecimal or something to get more variety of colors. But for now, the random is only those 5 colors.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Awesome. Good work, Tim.
All right,
Love to see it.
stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, I like the use of the bind and creating one function to handle it all. That's pretty cool.
All right, I'm not sharing anymore, right?
You are, yes.
How do I unshare? I am really bad
Uh,
at that.
I can stop your sharing. There you
Okay,
go.
cool. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and continue on with JavaScript. So that's gonna conclude the background colors.html. We're now gonna move into adding up, adding more functionality to our JavaScript and building onto the bad calculator. Right. So here is the JavaScript continued. Um, Most of this is pretty simple to what you guys just saw, but this kind of just expands a little bit more on how you can do regular JavaScript, not just like document.query selector, but you can save variables, right? You can create variables, and you can do math on here, which you already saw yourself, Tim. Um, and we're going to use the JavaScript logic to expand on the bad calculator. Now, I already have this pulled up. Here is the HTML and the JavaScript for the bad calculator. This all under lesson 04, next to the background colors directory as well. The HTML was pretty straightforward. It just had the H1 of bad calculator, and then it had a list. Now the IDs are pretty random. You might want to update the IDs here so they're a little bit more relevant to the tag that they belong to. But notice that there's 4 list items. The first list item is the number 0, and then it's the text of +3, then it's +9, and then there's -2, right? Um, and then at the very bottom, we have another header. And this header has the text result, but it has a span inside this header, and the span is empty, right? They gave an ID to the span, so they're able to access it, and it's called place to put result. And we're going to see how they're going to use this span to output the result of what came from the functionality of the calculator. Right, and before I dive more into the CSS, let me show you what it's looking like. This is the bad calculator opened up with Live Server, right? We saw the different stuff here. Just some very basic CSS to format in the way that it is. It's nothing fancy, but we have 4 buttons essentially. And it's a bad calculator because it doesn't work like your traditional calculator where you can add or subtract, divide, or multiply from the range of 0 to 9. Here we only get 3 options, which is one being let me refresh this too. Initially, result starts with blank. There's nothing here, as we saw in the HTML. But if we press the +3 button, it adds 3 to our result. And we see here that there's now some kind of text here. I can press the +3 again. And maybe I double-clicked it. I don't know what that was. There we go. I did double-click it. My apologies. And it makes it to 6. Right? +3 again makes it to 9. Now, if I press the +9, it'll add 9 as intended. So now this is 18. And then the -2, you can kind of guess what it's doing. It's going to subtract the result by 2. Right? And notice also if I keep doing that, it's going to go into the negatives. Now, this isn't really what you would expect from a calculator. I think Google might have something very simple. And let's use this kind of as a quick reference. Maybe there's a more simple one that shares a representation of ours. There we go. Here's a much more simpler one that resembles the intended outcome that should be this right here. Right? But as we already know, with calculators, we grew up with them in elementary school, middle school, and high school as they got more complex. But we want to build a very simple calculator here. And the reason I show you guys this is because the last time we did this assignment, the students I had were struggling a lot on trying to visualize what they should do, right? So use this as a guideline, like looking at your calculator, what you should kind of have here. Uh, Now, if I were to be tackling this assignment, there's a couple things that I would do to kind of set me up for success. And first and foremost, you never want to just focus on CSS right off the bat, right? And I think Chase, you were around the ballpark yesterday. You didn't worry about the CSS, but you were worried about the functionality, and that's the most important part. There's no reason for an application that looks fancy, but when you try to press something, it does freaking nothing, right? That's the use of the application. It might as well just be an image, right? So we always want to focus first on the functionality, but some CSS is good. We want to have enough to kind of get an idea of what our application is doing. Very similar to when I was doing the layout. I wanted to kind of get the divs in there and add a border and some color there so I can see where my divs are being at before I started moving them around. And I would do the same thing for a calculator. I would add the layout or the foundation of where your calculator should be, which should be, a bunch of divs within divs, right? So you have your one big div. You should have maybe 2 divs here, one that holds the results, and the other div can hold all the buttons, right? This specific div don't really have too much in it besides some kind of like H tag or P tag to show the result. But the second div that's right here, this row, big row, will have multiple rows that go from left to right, and those rows should have like columns. So there's going to be a bunch of divs within divs. And then you want to give some specific IDs or classes to the row that you're trying to work on. or specifically a number. And then once you have it kind of set up, give it some kind of height, width, so you can kind of space out and you can actually see what you're doing, right? And then once you have that kind of labeled out or kind of drawn out for you, you can kind of start going in there and adding some functionality. I would start with ensuring that your JavaScript and your HTML file are connected, right? Because one of the things that I always see is people go here, they'll start adding some JavaScript, and then they don't see anything on their page. They're like, "Why is it not working?" And they probably messed this part up or just forgot to do it. And a good way to test if these two are talking without adding a bunch of code is using the console.log method. All right, so the very top of your JavaScript file, imagine there was nothing else here, right? I just connected my JavaScript file to my HTML and I want to see if it's working. Well, you can do a console.log message here and say, hey, I am connected to the HTML file. And now to see this run, we can use our dev tools. If you right click your page and go to inspect, there's a section in your tools that's called console, and that's exactly what you think it is. It's almost like the what's supposed to show when you print something out or console log in your terminal. It allows you to see those commands, and you can already see here that in my app.js file on line 1, there is this output here that says I am connected to the HTML file, right? So that's telling me it's working. If for some reason I messed up the link between the JavaScript and the HTML file, when I reload this, you see that nothing gets printed out. And then when I come back here and I put it back in place, it refreshes and it's here. So that's a very simple way to ensure before you start adding all this complex code and you're trying to break your computer, make sure your JavaScript file is actually connected to your HTML file. And take advantage of this console right here. This is a very powerful tool for debugging and for the development process, especially when you're making a function. Let's say, let's go ahead and comment this back into place. Before you actually start adding a bunch of functionality, like trying to manipulate DOM, to make sure that a button is doing what it should be doing, or you connected the event listener how it should, this button is listening to the click, right? Before you start adding all that functionality, it's a good way to make sure that the button that you connected using the event listener with the function and you grabbed it the right way is by doing this, right? In that function you're trying to add to the event listener, do a console.log, and then when you click on it, if it does something on the console, then you know it's working. You notice that it adds a number every time I click it, so how many times it's printing it out. So this is a good way to also test if you connected buttons together, right? And your code and JavaScript is doing what it should be doing. But yeah, so once you actually lay out this foundation of creating some kind of framework for how your calculator should kind of look like, it doesn't have to be pretty, just a bunch of squares and borders so you can see where everything's at. Set up one button, right? Click on the number buttons to see if they show on your results. And if the buttons are all listening to the click, then you're good to move forward. And I would say probably handle the very simple arithmetic portion of it, like the plus or the minus, right? So you might want to just focus on the plus button first. And the way that this works, right? When we click a button, it should show on the result. And every time we click another button, all it's going to do is append it to that number. But the moment we click any of the arithmetic buttons here, like the plus, it should probably either do something like this or clear it so you can add more information in here. And then once you press the equal sign, it should show you the results, and so on and so forth, right? Maybe have a clear button as well to reset the text. But handle the plus and the minus first before you start even thinking about multiplication, division, and you start getting very confused. But tackle that. See if your buttons are displaying the numbers. If when you click multiple numbers, it's appending them as it should. And then what's supposed to happen after you press the plus button. Here, if I press the plus button, yeah, see, even this one's doing the same thing too. It's adding the plus sign text onto their my text here. If you want to do it this way, because then it could get a little complex, like how do I know this is addition? You might have to make a boolean that says like is adding is equal to false, and then the moment they press the plus button, you can set it to true. So depending what the boolean is telling you, you're gonna do one thing or the other. So there's different ways of tackling this, right? The only limit is gonna be your imagination. Use everything that you know about coding so far, whether it's Python or JavaScript, to kind of get this working. And the next thing that I want to talk about is also the other uh, things that come into how you manipulate your elements, right? A new one that we see here is the inner text, right? So you saw how to manipulate the style and the background, but if you want to manipulate the content of a inner tag, you can use inner text. I think you also have inner HTML as a different option. To get a list of all these, it's a simple Google search, or you can go to W3 Schools, or if you don't want to go through documentation, you can just have ChatGPT open and ask ChatGPT, hey, how do I use a DOM to manipulate the text of a HTML tag? But let's see if we can find something here. I wonder where these are at on inner text. Okay, they're under HTML elements, right? Inner text right here. It gets the inner text of an element, so you can get it or you can even set it, right? And it will show you examples. You have inner HTML. Get the HTML content of the element as well. So they work fairly similar. You can get elements by class name or get elements by tag name. I'm surprised I haven't gotten this question yet. These do exist, and you might be wondering, well, why do we use query selector? Well, because query selector can grab anything, right? Where these are very specific, where they are only going to grab an element by the class name, right? Which you could do, but we don't teach that one because query selector is more flexible with what items you're able to grab. We have some other attributes here, like I want to say append child. This is a very good one, which is going to come in handy. Append child allows you to add an element to another element. Well, what does that mean? Well, think about your unordered list here, right? If you wanted to add a list item specifically to this element here, well, how would you do that? Well, the child terminology that I just said is referencing to items that are directly nested within another tag, right? So in this context, this list item, because it's nested within the unordered list, this is a child of the unordered list element. And with that same kind of logic, then the unordered list is the parent of the list item. Does that make sense in any shape, way, or form? All right, so when we use append child, what you're trying to tell your DOM is, hey, I want you to append a child or append an element to some kind of specific element, right? All right, so let's say if I'm trying to grab this unordered list, I can give it a class, and it could be like button list, and I can say unordered list is equal to document dot query selector, and I want to select the class button list, right? And what this method does, as you guys already figured out, it's going to grab whatever element that shares this class name, and it's going to save it to this variable. And then once I get that variable, what I can do is say unordered list dot append child, right? And then append child is going to take another element. And let's see how this works real quick. Append child, notice they did something here, right? They create an element. They use a method called create element, which I didn't cover, but this is how you would create a new element in HTML. right? So if you wanted to create a new div, a new input tag, a new paragraph tag, there's a method for that, and that's called create element, and it takes the syntax for how that element is called. So this method here is going to create a list item, and then save it to this variable called node. And then I'm not quite sure what the create text node is. I'm going to assume that they're adding the letter water or the text water to this list item and saving it to the variable text node. But after they pretty much format what this should say, they append it onto node, right? So we're going to use create element to get this to work. So let's say, let's create a new element, and I believe it's going to be have to be let. We'll say this let list item is equal to document dot create element, and I'm going to create a list item. And then I'm going to append this list item into my unordered list. And this should work. It should run automatically. I wonder if I can see it real quick. It is here, but there's no text in there, right? So let's add some text, right? I can see here in the elements within my actual document that it did add it, right? But I didn't give it any kind of text, which is why it's blank. But I can hover over it and I can see where it's supposed to go. So let's do that. After we create the list item, let's say list item dot inner text, and I'm going to say 5 or plus 5. Let's refresh this. List item. And it seems that it's not adding it. I wonder why. If I say equals 5, there we go. My bad. The way that it wants it done is a little bit different. But here you go. We created that new list item. We added a text to it, and we appended it to the button list unordered list tag, right? And we see that here. Here is my unordered list element that's called button list. My JavaScript code was able to successfully add a new element on there. So that's how you can create new elements, manipulate the text in an element, and so on and so forth. And there's more different methods out there that you can experiment with. But append child was a really good one, so you can add a nested element to a different element. Let's see. What does parent node do? It gets the node name of the parent node of so on and so forth. So if I went to grab the parent of this list item, I would call the list item and say dot parent, and it would return the unordered list. So you're able to grab the parent. We can do stuff like dot remove, where it removes an element from the document. So if you want to delete something, you can do that as well. And we don't have near enough time to go through every single one of these, as you can already tell just by looking at this long list of different methods. But as you encounter a problem, as you go ahead and you code along and try to build this application, and there's something that you want to do, then reference the documentation. And once again, the only limit is your imagination, right? If you encounter a problem like, man, I wish it would be pretty cool if I could add a new element to this current element I'm working on. I wonder if there is a method for it. Then that's when you would come to documentation and kind of just look up what kind of method would work for you, right? So once again, if your imagination sucks, then you're obviously going to stop at 1 foot walls. But the only limit is going to be your imagination. And that's honestly everything that you guys need to kind of get started on this. Let's go ahead. I'm going to come back and remove all the additional stuff I added here. I'm gonna break you up into your own rooms, even though there's only us three here. That way, I can bounce between both rooms here and there as the time goes by, and you guys can ask me any questions that you might have about the assignment. If you need some help, or if it's not doing what you want it to do, we can debug it one on one without interrupting each other. Do I have any questions before we break off into our groups?
We're creating the good calculator, right?
Correct. You're going to take
Okay.
this bad calculator and you're going to refactor the code a little bit to make it a good calculator.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are going to take an hour for this assignment. I think that should be a decent amount of time to get some progress. I don't think we'll be able to finish it, but we'll take an hour. We'll come back, reconvene. We'll see what we were able to do. If any of you guys found a new method of doing something and you want to share with the class, we'll definitely do that. And then afterwards, we'll move into the day of the week assignment. And then once that's concluded, that'll be the completion of today's lecture, since we only do have 2 people today. So, but I think that should be enough time for us to get some good practice with JavaScript and kind of just learning some new methods. Sound good? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording now. All right, welcome back, guys. That was a nice solid hour. I feel like we got some learning here. Tim is going to be demonstrating his example of his bad calculator and what he was able to achieve within that 1 hour. Tim, go ahead.
Okay. So do you want me to go through the code or demonstrate?
Let's go with the demonstration first, and then we can talk to code.
Okay. So hitting any of the numbers adds those numbers to the calculator display. And hitting any of the arithmetic will add it to the display as well. So 157 plus 12 equals 169 times 2 equals 181 minus 66 equals whatever, and then clear it.
That is super sweet. Yeah, good job, man. I want to see. Let's talk about the code. How did
Okay.
you achieve the ability to add it onto your display here?
Okay. So first I had all the event listeners listen for clicks within the boxes using the IDs. And then it would trigger a bound function that I created called add num. And all add num does is if it doesn't equal the literal equals text, then whatever the display total is now, you're going to split it into an array and then push that thing you're pushing, either a number or one of the arithmetic indicators, however you say that, to the end of the array. And then it would take that array and split it. I'm sorry, join it back into the ID'd element using document.querySelector.value. I tried .intertext and it just doesn't work, so I just kept messing with it until I figured out value works. Now, if you do hit the equals button, then instead of adding it to the array and then joining it again, it just uses the built-in function eval, which will take a string and evaluate it as an equation. So the string is already there because it's already written up in your calculator. So it does all the work for you. The only time that doesn't work is when you're trying to clear the screen, because adding a C or appending a C to an array and then joining it into your display is not going to help you clear anything. I created one additional function called mod num, bound it the same way using an event listener. And then all it does is resets the display total to nothing, and then the variable display total, and then it updates that using a query selector calc screen, just like it would, except it puts it as nothing. So it clears out the variable and it clears out the calc screen, essentially resetting the calculator.
This is pretty cool. You are the first person who was able to complete the assignment within an hour. Good stuff. I definitely do want to look more into the bind method because I'm still a little confused with it. This is new to me. I've yet to see anybody use the bind method, but
So
it,
the problem I was experiencing, and then the reason I've looked up how to do this with the bind, is because otherwise, all of the if I would pass an argument within a function, passing an empty function will work. It'll wait for you to click it. But if you pass an argument in that function, as soon as you load the page, it fires every single one of those event listeners as if I was clicking on something. I don't know why it does that, but binding it will allow it to, you'll wait till you actually click on it because it's passing it a value of null for the argument, and that argument is apparently is like an event listener.
mm,
I don't know. More research is needed as to why it does that, but that's the only solution I was able to find to pass an argument in a custom function.
okay.
I found that on Stack Overflow.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Pretty cool. You don't necessarily have to pass in a argument within the method. And we can kind of see that right now in the way that Chase did it, but this is a good way of doing it.
I just
Uh,
don't like to have extra functions. If I can do one function that does 99% of the work, then I'm going to use it.
yeah, fair enough. Um, then would you say that maybe there's a more efficient way of having to grab every single button with like number one, number two, number three, number four? Maybe just give a specific class of number to the input tag. And then once you grab the number, if you want to identify what number you grab, you can probably grab the text
Hmm.
in the function.
Yeah,
Um,
I could have done that.
I mean, but that's just one way of doing it. But still, that very interesting. Thank you for your demonstration, Tim.
Yep,
Appreciate
sure.
it.
Hmm.
Chase, you want to show a little bit of yours?
Yeah, I can. Definitely did not get that far, but
No,
that's
that's
okay.
okay.
Okay, so I'll share my screen.
This is mainly
Okay,
for
so
for those that aren't here in the class, so they kind of see other people's examples, so they have an idea of how to go about it. When
yeah,
they're working on their own.
yeah. So this is my calculator. Close this out. So I still have this as list, that's why the dot's there. But I just got to the point of adding one where it just will start adding them. So I can at least keep track of what numeral has been entered into the calculator. As far as the code, these we can kind of ignore these. So this is how I set mine up, right? I have the class, which is the result. That's where I want to result. It's obviously set as a list right now. Then I created the first row nav, and in each that there's a nav for 1, 2, 3, or the addition. Second row, same 4, 5, 6, or the minus. Third row, 7, 8, 9, or the multiplication. Fourth row, clear 0 equals to 5. So basically setting up the calculator. So that's how the actual goes. As far as the actual code goes, this took a lot more work. So I set actually I'm not worrying about that. So I changed, I did one addition. Like Tim, you had one function for all the numbers. I didn't even think of that at this point. So I was gonna have each number has its own function, which is definitely not as efficient. But I was just working on getting the first button to actually work. So I did a function add one. But if we go up here, you got the document, and then it looks for the class of one, then add event listener, and clicks, then it runs the function add one. It's not actually adding one, it could be minus one too. That's just what I named it. So I set the click number as one. All the other functions like at like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those would have been setting the clicked number as those numbers. And then setting the current result as the display, which the display at the start will have nothing, but if you click one, the display will then be one, and so this current result would be one because it's what's displayed in that result. And then what it does, this next line 12, um, it then sets the result display as changes it from just that one to clicked number plus the current result. And so that's how you get like 1, 1, 1, 1. Or if I set up this code for all the other Buttons, it would have been like 1 plus 2, 3, 4, 5 divide. So I definitely didn't get that far. I think the next step would be adding this into all of them and then doing the actual multiplication or the math operators. That's about as far as I got. Definitely not as efficient, I don't think, but seeing Tim's code was definitely a bit like some ideas I hadn't thought of. So it's good to see that.
Yeah, good stuff. Good job, Chase. Just a little nitpicking here. The tags used for the HTML, maybe not use nav tags, right? Because it's not in actual nav bar. Div will work just fine, just so they're not as confusing. And then nest the columns that belong to each row within the specific row, right? So, because I saw all the nav, um, all the tags of nav were all pretty much on the same level in a sense. So structuring the hierarchy of your HTML is also something that you want to get used to as well. But overall, good stuff. We're gonna go ahead and continue with the second and last part of today's class, so we can kind of get on with it. Um, and that's gonna be the day of the week. But before I do move forward, I kind of just wanted to touch up on what I was trying to say earlier. When you create a function like let's say add button, right? What you could have done, guys, instead was you can grab the current number, right? So you can create a variable called let current number, and then you will grab the you use document dot query selector, and then you would want to grab the number that is being called from here, right? Um, and you said there was an issue with how to grab arguments. Is that correct? Whenever you
Yeah,
call this,
for the event listeners specifically, yeah.
and there is a specific way of doing it. And if I remember correctly, the way of doing it would be something very similar to this, where let's say down here, we're up here. I'm gonna say document dot query selector,
Mhm.
and then I want to grab the class uh button or number button, and I believe this should work. Then you do add event listener. It should be a click. But when it comes down to the function, instead of defining the function in itself, what you would have to do,
Yeah,
I
you could build a
believe,
function right there using an arrow function or an anonymous function.
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
It should look something like this. I'm a little rusty on my code, but from here you would grab it, and you would say something like let current number equal, and I don't remember the exact syntax. It's been a while since I've done this, but you should be able to grab whatever button that you are calling this function, you should be able to grab it.
Does
Um,
JavaScript let you use self as an identifier for what you're working with currently?
it's something very similar to that, yes. I want to say it's probably like event or something.
Hmm.
Um, but it is something very similar to that. I would challenge you guys to kind of do some quick Google search on that, but there is a way of doing exactly that where you can do the function exactly from where it's called, and you're able to access the button that is running this function, if that makes sense. That way
Yeah,
you
it
can
it
grab it.
does. I actually thought about doing it that way, but I didn't think about being able to extract the actual button that I clicked on dynamically.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
there is a way. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how it's done. Just for you guys to know that there is a way that's possible. In case you want to find a much more better way of improving your code. Sound
yeah,
good?
absolutely. I'll look into it.
All right. Let's go ahead and move forward. The next part of today's class and the final part is going to be the day of the week.html. All right, so let me go ahead and pull this up. This one we're going to take significantly less time to do because it's not as hard as the back calculator. But hopefully the assignment that we just did was enough to kind of give you a better understanding of how it's working. So let me open this up with live server. and you should have something very similar to this. There's not much functionality on it, but this application should let the user know if, let me see, should let the user know if they inputted a weekday, a weekend, or they gave an incorrect day of the week. So make sure your application is case sensitive, or sorry, case insensitive. So Saturday is treated the same as all caps start Saturday, or Saturday where it looks like it's almost like camel case is treated the same, right? Right now we have the header, which is the what is today. We have a form where they added a label, and the label, it's straight up what the name kind of trying to convey to the user is just a description of what the input tag should have, right? And that's what they use to kind of add the day of the week here. So it's just a text for it. And then the input is where we're going to add the what day are we trying to add, right? So they should be able to add something like Saturday and say this is the weekend, or they should be able to add Wednesday and say this is the weekday, right? Something very similar to that. Very straightforward. And then whenever you press the button, the check, it should be able to do all that logic, right? So we need to be able to grab this button here, and this button is going to have an event listener, and that event listener is going to do something. And you kind of already see it here written out kind of in your JavaScript file. We have a document.query selector, and it's grabbing the ID of check, and I have to specify this right because I saw some issues here whenever we're trying to grab some elements. The issue we weren't grabbing the element was because we weren't adding the hashtag or the dot corresponding to what we were trying to grab. But that's going to grab this ID here of check that belongs to the button, right? And it adds an event listener for click, and it runs the function called check day, right? And it's kind of already doing it for you. If you see here, it's going to grab a tag that has the hashtag of day, which is right here. The ID of day is the input tag itself. So it's already grabbing the value that exists inside of this input tag, right? And just so we can kind of see how this is working, let me go ahead and print out. I'm sorry, I'm so used to Python. Console log day, right? And if we go back here, I'm going to open up the inspect tool. It's pretty much already connected for you. If you say Wednesday and we press check, it has Wednesday there. Or if we put Saturday, it'll have Saturday, right? Now, the goal for you guys is to be able to grab this information that's added within the input tag and then respond underneath saying, hey, this is a weekend or this is a weekday, right? So you need to make a new element, and then it's going to take the information from the input tag and figure out what day does this fall in during the week, right? Some ideas so far. How do you think you might be able to identify something is a weekday or a weekend?
I was just thinking about setting up a simple switch case for 7 cases, and then a default case for if it doesn't match it. And any of those cases would be 2 uppercase value of whatever you typed.
Sure. Okay, that's one way. Chase, you got another idea?
I just thought basically like say if the input equals Saturday, Sunday, saying this is a weekend. If it doesn't match that, saying this is a weekday. But I'm not sure because then somebody could put in like something that's not even day of the week. Maybe they could put in like Apple, and it would say that would be an issue, obviously. But that was my initial thought. But now after I said that, I realized like, okay, I don't think that would work.
Yeah, and that's right there. What you just did, that's called rubber ducky. If you guys remember day zero, right? When you say something out loud, you're like, oh, now I just realized maybe not the best way of doing it. I think very simple way is just create 2 different variables, and hard code the day for the weekdays and the days for the weekend. And then whatever you get your input, check if it exists on either one or the other. And then if it's in one list, print one out. If it's in the other list, print the other out, right? Um, and then you might want to do some formatting as well. Whenever you get the input, maybe set it to lowercase, right? So it's all the same across the board. So that, I think, from the top of my head, a much simpler way of doing it. If you want to use switch cases, all power to you. That's a very powerful way of doing stuff too. So I'd like to see how you achieve that, Tim. But whichever route you guys decide to take, they would all work. So give it a try. We're gonna take 15 minutes and we'll call it there. Sound good? All right, I'll see you guys in 15. We're gonna stay here. We'll go ahead and pause the recording and continue the recording. Who wants to take a shot at it? Chase, I see you moving your lips, so
Yeah, I can go first.
let's get it.
So can you guys see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So here, basically I just set 2 arrays saying weekdays, Monday through Friday, weekend, Saturday, Sunday. Then the function. So I took the value, then I turned the value to lowercase to match, so it doesn't really matter. It's not case sensitive. I said if weekdays, so if this array included the day that was input, it's going to set this result down here as this is a weekday bit in. Then if that's not a match, if that fails, I'll go to else if weekend includes that day for the given input, and it does include it, it'll say this is a weekend. And then if it's neither of them, it says this is not a day of the week. So if I go to the actual website and I say like Saturday, check, like this is the weekend. I do Monday, this is the weekday, and if I say cat, this is not a day of the week.
Right on. Pretty straightforward, right? Good
Yeah,
stuff.
that one was a lot easier, I think.
Yeah. I see that all the time, and every time I teach this class, I'm like thinking I should have probably told him to do this one first before the back calculator, and I just thought that the same thing right now. Every single time, I always forget. But good stuff. Hopefully, that gives you guys a good idea of how that works. So if you guys really wanted to, right, you could build a very, very simple application with everything that you just already figured out. Because this is all it really takes to make a very, very small website. Now, it won't be anything crazy, right? Because it doesn't have its own database. You're not incorporating any kind of third-party APIs. You still don't have the concept of CRUD methods, which we will talk about later. But this will make a very, very simple application, right? You could, with just these basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that's honestly like the basic fundamentals of it. We're going to be covering a lot more other, items that we can use to make our application better. But this is straight up just the core of what an application really is. Tomorrow, we are going to talk about APIs, which I kind of already showed you a sneak peek of that yesterday at the end of class. Um, it's going to tie into, if you recall, my example that I went through when using my own personal application. And I was showing you guys how when I would log in, I was putting in some kind of like request to somewhere. Well, that request was being put into my backend, right? My database that I had, right? But the way that the request was set up to talk to my backend, that's the exact same way we're going to set it up to talk to third-party APIs. So this skill can transfer over for when you work with your database. Also, part of the assessment for your personal project when you get into your cohort is going to incorporate 2 third-party APIs. So it's a very important part in our curriculum. So make sure you get a good understanding of what APIs are and how they work. And they're really gonna allow us to kind of just juice up our program. We'll talk more about what exactly is an API. I'm sure you probably I've heard the term before. Maybe you're a little familiar with it, but we'll get to see that tomorrow. And I think that's going to conclude today's class. I don't want to start the API and stop halfway. We're going to resume this on Monday. Hopefully, that bad calculator assignment really gave you a nice idea of how you utilize JavaScript with HTML. I challenge you guys to continue building off on the assignment that we've been covering. You can definitely go back and mess around with the previous assignments, and especially like the BBC website. Now that you know some CSS, try to actually add on to that one. Maybe if you didn't finish the back calculator, definitely continue on that there chase. But mess around with that. And I'm gonna leave you guys there. I'll stay here a little bit longer if anyone has any more further questions. But if not, thank you guys for showing up. I know it's your Friday, so enjoy your weekend, and I will see you guys Monday. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.